Today's conversation is not merely about remarriage. It is about something far more fundamental: how human beings make decisions when they find themselves standing at the quiet crossroads of their lives. For women in their 50s and beyond, remarriage is rarely about romance alone. It is no longer the naïve optimism of youth. Instead, it becomes a deeply layered negotiation with time, with memory, and with the subtle, persistent weight of solitude. By midlife, life begins to rearrange itself. Children leave home. Careers plateau or transform. Social circles gradually narrow. And perhaps most significantly, the home grows quieter. It is within this silence that many encounter something unfamiliar, not merely being alone, but truly experiencing aloneness for the first time. And within that experience, a question naturally emerges. Should I now find someone to share my life with? This is the psychological threshold where the idea of remarriage often begins. But before moving forward, we must establish a critical distinction, one that is frequently overlooked. Loneliness is human, but decisions made within loneliness are not always reliable. They have the power to reshape the trajectory of an entire life. This is not a discourse against remarriage. It is an inquiry into the conditions under which such a decision is made and whether those conditions are psychologically sound. Because remarriage after 50 is structurally different from marriage in youth. In youth, marriage begins with possibility. In midlife, it begins with history. Past relationships, children, financial systems, personal habits, emotional scars. These are no longer peripheral variables. They are central components of the relationship's architecture. In that sense, remarriage is not simply the continuation of love. It is the reconstruction of life itself. At this point, it is useful to recall an ancient philosophical insight. Human beings do not choose reality. They choose the illusions shaped by their desires. This is not poetic exaggeration. It is a precise psychological observation. When loneliness deepens, when anxiety intensifies, when the need for emotional refuge grows stronger, the mind does not perceive others objectively. Instead, it begins to reinterpret them. Flaws become negotiable. Risks appear manageable. Incompatibilities seem temporary. Why? Because the mind is no longer seeking truth. It is seeking relief. This is why the most dangerous moment in considering remarriage is not uncertainty, but emotional peak. When loneliness reaches its height, perception itself becomes distorted. And so a fundamental question must be asked clearly, honestly, and without self-deception. Am I choosing this person because I genuinely value who they are? Or am I choosing this relationship because I am trying to escape being alone? The answer to this question determines the structural integrity of the relationship itself. Let us go further. Loneliness and dependence are often confused, but they are not the same. Loneliness is the desire for connection. Dependence is the inability to remain stable without it. One seeks enrichment. The other seeks survival. A relationship born from loneliness can still be healthy, but a relationship born from dependence often becomes asymmetrical emotionally, psychologically, and even economically. This leads to a more advanced diagnostic question. Am I capable of being emotionally stable on my own and still choosing this relationship? If the answer is no, then the relationship risks becoming a compensatory mechanism rather than a meaningful connection. This insight aligns with existential philosophy, particularly the idea that human beings are fundamentally free, but that this freedom inevitably confronts us with solitude. From this perspective, loneliness is not merely suffering, it is a signal. It asks, what kind of life do you truly want to construct? This question becomes especially critical in midlife, because after 50, life is no longer an open draft, it is a partially written manuscript. Any new relationship must integrate with what already exists. Remarriage, therefore, is not about filling an emotional void. It is about determining whether two fully formed lives can coexist without eroding one another. Another philosophical principle reinforces this idea. Happiness does not depend on external conditions, but on how we respond to them. A relationship cannot compensate for a life that lacks internal coherence. If emotional stability depends entirely on another person, then even a well-intentioned relationship becomes fragile. This leads to a critical structural principle. In midlife relationships, stability must precede connection, not the other way around. The healthiest form of remarriage is not built on the need to be completed. It is built on the capacity to remain whole. And this leads to a profound question. Can you affirm your life as it is and still choose to expand it? Because remarriage should not be an escape from one's life. It should be an expansion of a life that is already grounded. If the motivation is avoidance of loneliness, fear, or uncertainty, the relationship inherits that instability. But if the motivation is alignment, shared values, mutual respect, compatible life structures, then the relationship has a foundation. Now, let us move to the next layer of inquiry. In our earlier discussion, we established that loneliness can distort perception. This brings us to a more difficult question. Is love alone enough to sustain a relationship? In youth, love often begins as an emotional surge, attraction, passion, excitement. These forces are powerful, and sometimes they are enough because life itself is still fluid. But in midlife, life already has structure. There are routines, financial systems, family responsibilities, emotional histories. And within this context, love must coexist with reality. This creates a fundamental paradox. Love without structure becomes unstable. Structure without love becomes empty. A relationship based only on emotion lacks durability. A relationship based only on practicality lacks vitality. Therefore, the task is not to choose between love and reality, but to integrate them. Midlife relationships demand a higher level of awareness. They require not only feeling, but discernment. Lifestyle differences, financial expectations, family dynamics. These are not secondary concerns, they are structural variables. To ignore them in the name of love is naïve. To prioritize them at the expense of emotional connection is incomplete. So what defines a balanced relationship? 3 elements. First, respect a recognition of the other person's fully formed life. Second, dialogue the ability to confront reality honestly and early. Third, autonomy, the capacity to remain an individual within the relationship. When these elements are present, a relationship gains resilience. Love, then, is not separate from reality. It is something that must be constructed within it. This is particularly true in remarriage, because remarriage is not the beginning of a fantasy. It is the continuation of reality, now shared. So the essential questions become, is there genuine emotional connection? And is this relationship structurally sustainable? Only when both answers are yes, does a relationship have the potential to endure. As we approach our conclusion, many people ask, should I remarry? But this question is fundamentally flawed. Remarriage is not about right or wrong. It is about alignment. Across countless real-life cases, one pattern is clear. Successful remarriages are not built to fix a life. They are built upon a life that is already stable. When a person enters a relationship from internal balance, the relationship becomes an enhancement, not a dependency. But when a relationship is used to solve instability, it inevitably inherits that instability. Here is the difficult truth. No relationship completes a life. Relationships are not architects of identity. They are participants in it. Meaning does not come from marital status, but from alignment between one's choices and one's inner structure. So the final question is not, is remarriage necessary? But rather, what kind of life do I want? And does this relationship truly support that life? Because after 50, life is no longer about following a script. It is about intentional design. Some will choose partnership. Others will choose independence. Neither is inherently superior. What matters is coherence. And perhaps this is the most important conclusion. Remarriage is not an obligation, but for some, It can be a meaningful expansion of life. The difference lies not in the choice itself, but in the clarity behind it. So before you decide, ask yourself, am I moving towards something meaningful or simply moving away from something uncomfortable? Because a relationship born from avoidance will eventually recreate the very discomfort it was meant to escape. But a relationship chosen from clarity, that is something entirely different. It is not an escape. It is a deliberate construction of life. As we conclude this discussion, remember, your life, especially in its later chapters, is not something to be completed by another person. It is something to be authored by you. And any relationship you choose should not replace that authorship, but stand beside it. If this perspective has offered you clarity, I invite you to continue engaging with this work. Subscribe, like, and share so that more people can approach life's most important decisions with greater awareness. In our next discussion, we will explore a related question. Why do men in their 50s seek remarriage? Many assume it is simply loneliness, but the underlying structure is far more complex, rooted in identity, security, and emotional dependence. Until then, thank you.